Welcome everybody to Plaid's Tech Talk series. Today we're going to be sharing insights on how to minimize fraud while maximizing customer acquisition efficiency. So before we start, just some quick housekeeping. You can use the Q&A widget at the bottom of the screen anytime to drop in your questions, and we're going to be addressing those at the end of the session. We'll also share a recording of this session via email following today's Tech Talk. So don't worry if you miss anything, you can take a look at it later. So let's start with some quick introductions. I'm Alain Meier, and I'm the head of identity at Plaid. For those of you who aren't familiar, you probably know Plaid as the company that provides connectivity to financial accounts. Think going to Venmo and connecting your bank account so you can send money to friends and family. So that's where we started, but today we're so much more. We're a full stack onboarding platform that helps you verify a user's identity, connect financial accounts, and also activate customers. So how do I fit into the mix? In January, Plaid merged with a company I helped start called Cognito that helps businesses verify their customers and reduce fraud. And then in May, we launched our first Plaid IDV and monitor solutions, which build on that foundation that Cognito helped to create. Anthony, I'm going to turn it over to you for a quick introduction.
Thanks, Alan. Hi, everyone. My name is Anthony Cesar. I'm a solutions engineer on the identity verification team with Alain. We've been working together for almost 4 years now, and looking forward to discussing IDV with you guys. Back to you, Alan.
Okay. Thanks, Anthony. 4 beautiful years. All right, so we have an exciting discussion ahead of us today. Today's Tech Talk is for anyone who wants to grow their user base while still balancing and managing fraud risk. So you're going to walk away from this discussion with 3 things. One is understanding the trade-offs between balancing risk and user experience. 2 is the key factors to consider when reevaluating your ID verification stack. We've actually found that most fintechs reevaluate this every 12 months on average because it's such a difficult yet high ROI part of the onboarding process. And then finally, 3, understanding the advantages of a unified sign-up experience. So let's start by talking a little bit about today's landscape. So you can think about user onboarding as a seesaw with 2 competing forces: the need to decrease fraud on the one hand, but also the need to more efficiently acquire users. How aggressive your anti-fraud checks are may minimize risk, but it might also jeopardize a good customer actually signing up, both because of potentially added friction, but also every incremental anti-fraud system that you add has a false positive rate associated with it, which can block good users. And there's a difference between how many users you let through and how much fraud you can actually catch. So you need to strike a balance. And this balance is unique to every single fintech. What works for a brand new neobank won't necessarily be the same as one that's already scaling. For instance, newer fintechs getting off the ground may be more willing to accept fraud so they don't have false positives that reject good users. At the same time, newer fintechs with less funding or fintechs at scale looking to preserve their financials may not actually be able to accept higher fraud risk. So it all depends on you and your organization's priorities. And your organization needs to be constantly reevaluating your priorities. For instance, in the last 2 years, we've witnessed a huge increase in fraudsters targeting brand new fintechs because they know that the anti-fraud systems that they have in place won't be as sophisticated. So some quick interesting stats. There's been a 64% increase in fraud stemming from identity theft and fraudulent accounts in 2021, but I feel like I don't need to convince you that fraud is already on the rise. And 73% of Americans say that easy signups impact whether or not they use an app. But I expect this also shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone listening in today. So over the years, we've worked with hundreds of businesses and learned about different risk management programs across fintechs, both large and small. Based on that, as well as recent research, here's some common issues that we're seeing again and again. Systems are excessively complicated. Having spoken to many customers, we've noticed that companies are using on average 6 to 12 different vendors simply because of how teams are structured internally. Mid to large size organizations have specialized teams for each part of the risk equation. one team for handling payments fraud, one for sign-up fraud, one for account takeover fraud, et cetera. And this leads to a world where most anti-fraud checks are actually redundant. As a consequence of vendor count creep, we're also seeing that businesses are overspending on fraud and ID verification. On average, $2 to $4 per user verified in the United States for all of the checks that they're running. Many ID verification orchestration systems allow you to turn on a bunch of data sources and checks, which is great, but even many in-house fraud experts don't actually really understand the intricate overlap and incompatibilities between the systems that they enable. So we're also seeing that most businesses are valuing their users over their own teams. So fintechs are investing heavily in that end user experience, as they should, but the back-end review systems are usually a second-class citizen in the organization. Non-user facing features simply don't get the same level of investment. And as a result, end users grow frustrated and they can lose trust in your brand because your risk agents either haven't provided the support that they need or they can't reach their case in a timely manner. And then finally, fraud sophistication is rising to unprecedented levels. Every fintech has a baseline level of normal fraud, but the most struggling times for most fintechs come in concentrated fraud waves, usually lasting between hours and days long. Fintechs can feel like they have fraud figured out, but then in the space of days experience hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars in fraud losses. We routinely invest large amounts of our time working collaboratively with our customers to identify fraud rings within their user base. So your verification system actually has a real impact on business metrics beyond the obvious. If you distribute your product through the App Store or the Google Play Store, you may know that ID verification related issues plague the review sections of your apps, driving down your overall ratings. Take a good look at your app's reviews as well as your competitors' reviews and see how many of them mention IDV, and I expect it'll be more than you think. ID verification is the very first experience a lot of users have with your brand, so it's paramount that you get it right. Here's a couple of real reviews that we found with only a few minutes of research, but it can be pretty eye-opening. I like this one. I downloaded the app and tried to apply. However, was not allowed to submit an application due to an error in the address verification system. So you'll see those all over the place. Okay, so concretely, how do you actually acquire more users without increasing fraud? There's three main strategies right now. And also I'm leading up to a demo here, so I'll finally stop blabbing soon. But in summary, they involve three categories. One is building dynamic and flexible experiences with intelligent fallbacks. So it's not actually a one size fits all for all of your customers. They get a tailored experience in line with their risk, geography, and your internal compliance and risk requirements. Two is automating and streamlining the review process. So humans are some of the slowest part of the verification process. And so reducing the hours spent on reviews is really key. This is particularly problematic during spike periods that fintechs can see, like crypto hype cycles or meme stock events. And then three, finally, streamlining your actual underlying IDV stack. So the more moving parts you have, the more bugs and cross-system incompatibilities. And from our experience, the lower the actual conversion rate and the higher the false positive rate. Remember that more is not necessarily better. It's about finding the right verification and the right anti-fraud components, and then making sure that they're well tested and working with high confidence in the myriad real-world edge cases that you'll end up seeing. So with that, I'm going to pass things off to Anthony to run us through a short demo of the products.
Thanks, Alan. Okay, let's take a look at what verifying identity with Plaid looks like. I'll go ahead and share my screen. And what we'll have here is a quick screen cap. We'll first take a look at the end user experience. This is just one example of what things could look like. We want to show you all of the components. This is fully customizable, and we'll take a look at that in just a minute. So let's get started. Here, what we have here is Ssn, which is our fake fintech app, and we'll see what the user onboarding journey looks like. Our user, Layla, is going to first provide some very basic information for account creation. And at that point, she'll get the opportunity to begin verifying her identity. Once we do that, we have our Plaid link user experience that appears, and we'll collect some very basic details like phone number, first name and last name. and we'll go ahead and send a simple SMS verification message just to verify that Layla is actually in possession of that phone. And once the code is entered, we can get to address and date of birth. And I'll pause here for a second. As you can see on address, we have an autocomplete. This is going to help conversion in a couple of ways. One, we're reducing friction by not making the user enter the whole address. And we're also eliminating typos, which negatively hurt match rates. Another thing that we do on address is we will actually do a live check to see if the address you entered is an apartment building. If it is, we'll proactively pop up the address line 2 field to encourage the user to actually provide an apartment number, which users typically fail to do. And that also will hurt match rates if we don't have the apartment number. We then get to date of birth. We have a simple month dropdown and a day and year input. And once we're done with that, we get to the final piece of PII, which is SSN. That can be last 4, full 9, or omitted altogether. We're already done with this check and we're at document verification. Layla can just pick which document she wants to upload, and then very straightforward, take a picture of the front, take a picture of the back, also in this case, based on the document type. And we can go ahead and authenticate this document at that point. Within the span of 15 to 30 seconds, we'll run a variety of checks to make sure that this is a legitimate document. It's not a copy of a document or a fake. We are not dealing with a damaged or expired document. And we'll also check that it does actually match the information that was provided by the user in the earlier stage. And now we get to selfie check, where Layla will just present her face to the camera and then give us a smile. And at that point, we'll be able to determine that Layla is a real human being. We're not dealing with a fraudster wearing a mask or presenting a picture to the camera or running a deepfake attack. So as far as the actions go, Layla is already done. During this time in the backend, we've also run some sanctions and PEP screenings. We've run a host of anti-fraud checks to make sure that nothing looks suspicious about the session. And this was all automated. There's no human in the loop, and Layla is done fully with her verification. She can proceed with the remainder of her onboarding, which in this case would be linking your bank account, depositing funds, and that's it. So that's the user experience. I'll pause here and let's take a look at what the backend side of things may look like. So I'll go ahead and share a different screen. Okay. So what you're seeing here is the identity verification and monitor dashboard. This is where everything IDV and monitor will live, anywhere from the actual creation and management of programs and templates to the actual review of reports for verifications you've run or screenings. So let's take a look at both of those things. We'll start on the identity verification side. I'm going to go ahead and create a template. So we'll click here. We'll do a template. The template is where all of your settings related to identity verification will reside. Anything from general setup, where you'll be able to, at the check of a box, enable a screening as part of the verification. So that's the sanctions and PEP part of things, as well as enable SMS verification. And you can tell here, we have a nice visualizer that'll show you your changes in real time. So if I check the box, no SMS verification, and that's it. Then we have some design options where you can choose your color palette. You can upload your own logo to customize the experience. And then we get into the meat of the customization, which is going to be workflows and rule sets, where you truly have the power to define what the user experience looks like. So you can choose what steps the user will go through, what kind of fallback options you may have in place, and just at a high level, what it takes for a user to pass. And that's a good segue into rule sets, where you can granularly define what exactly is required for a user to actually pass this verification. So whatever your requirements are, you can configure them here through the rule set builder. And the same thing goes for the risk section, where you can set your acceptable risk levels for a variety of categories. So that's the editor. Very quickly, let's go ahead and take a look at an actual verification report here on the identity verification side. So let's see, a verification that passed. So we'll pick up Leslie Nope, which is a test record here. And the way to look at this is we wanted to make it very simple for you to look at what happened with a user from the moment of onboarding all the way to today. So in this case, you can see that we have a chronological order of all of the steps that Leslie has gone through. We have SMS verification that was passed with 1 attempt. We then have our PII check. We then have our document verification, et cetera, all the way to the end. And we make it very clear what the status of each step is. And we also give you granular detail about some of the checks that go into each of those components. So in this case, everything's good. We've passed all of the verification methods. And you can see we also have our watch list screening that is displayed here with a high-level overview of what lists we're screened against, and then a link to the actual report on the monitor side, which will be more detailed. And we'll take a look at that in just a second. And finally, we have our risk section here, which is what I was referring to as the checks we've done on the back end to make sure that nothing looks suspicious about the session. Things are going to be split across 4 categories, and we look at a variety of things across the board to try and detect anything that may look suspicious and catch fraudsters. So that could be things like whether the email provided is deliverable, whether it's been found in spam blacklists, the average age of the email, whether the device is connecting through a VPN, Tor browser, proxy, all of these things that are typically associated with fraud vectors. We'll also do a fingerprinting of the user session when they're going through verification to then take a look at the velocity at which they're signing up on our network. So if you're having the same device, same user signing up 10 times in the last week, probably an indicator that something wrong is going on, and we'll surface that and block the user if necessary. So those are the different components here that you can take a look at, and then we'll have a bunch of other information as well. We'll even do a check to see if there are social media accounts associated with the phone number and email provided. That's a good positive trust indicator. If you're seeing a bunch of accounts, great. If you're seeing nothing at all, that's a little bit suspicious. So that may be an indicator of synthetic identity fraud. Let's go ahead and take a look at Monitor also. Monitor is going to be, again, our watch list screening solution and PEP screening solution. And let's go through the equivalent of the templates, which is going to be the program creation, where, again, all of the settings that relate to your monitoring program will live here. And I think you can see a theme here where one of the goals of designing this product was to have a codeless management platform where we give the power to the actual teams that manage these processes, compliance and products, to manage every detail from the dashboard themselves, as opposed to the typical cadence of having to go to your dev team and say, hey, can you change this? Can you make this adjustment? Which is very cumbersome. So here you can see we go from things as simple as the name of the program to directly substantial things like ongoing monitoring, where if you click this toggle, we will start rescanning your entire user base on a daily basis without any action being needed from you. Any hits appear down the line, 6 months down the line for a user, we'll surface those and you can take care of them appropriately. We'll let you pick the matching sensitivity that you would like based on your risk level. We then have some filtering options to reduce some false positives. False positive reduction is a big initiative for this solution as well. We have very advanced matching algorithms, and additionally, some of these features will help further. We then get into some settings that are related to the way you want these cases to be handled if they do surface, the assignment methodology, whether you want a double review system where 4 eyes would be required to confirm or dismiss hits. And then again, with a toggle system, you can pick which lists you want to screen against. So if this one is of interest, that's all you need to do, and all of your users will start being screened against it. So we have a variety of lists internationally that you can enable, and the support for this solution as a whole is global. We can do cross-lingual matching across 18 different language pairs. And here you can see we have a separate PEP section as well, which will let you do the PEP screening with different risk levels depending on which positions you may be interested in. So that's the equivalent of your template creation. And let's go ahead and take a look at an actual screening as well. So I'll go into one of my programs and I'll actually create a screening live right now on the demo. So all we need as a minimum is going to be a name. So we'll just do name today. We'll use Joseph Kony, which is a name that may be familiar to some of you. And as you can see here, we have a similar setup where we're trying to give you a chronological timeline of everything that ever happened with this user. So this is the initial screening. It'll give you a high-level status of what the results were. As you can tell here, the yellow dots are going to be all the lists that we did get a hit on. And here we have the actual granular details of that screening, where each of these is a hit, and you can drill down and see exactly what information is available in that watch list hit. This is all data that is coming from government watch list that we have cleaned up on our end. We have our own ingestion pipeline that makes sure that you don't have to deal with dirty data, and you'll have a very easy time comparing the input against what is actually available from the government to make a decision in real time. You can then confirm and dismiss your hits and go ahead and address the screening. So in this case, we feel pretty good that this is Joseph Kony, the actual warlord. So we're gonna confirm this, even leave a note. And confirm all the hits, complete a review. And if you click here, you can see that that was immediately entered in the timeline. We now have the review that I've completed, the status was changed, and this user is now rejected. So that's a high-level overview of screening as well on the monitor side. And I will pass it back to you, Alain, for the remainder.
Awesome. Thank you, Anthony. That was great.
I think you maybe
all right, let's bring up the slides again. Here we go. All right, so I hope you all enjoyed the demo. For the final segment of today's Tech Talk, we're going to dive into why Plaid is the right ID verification partner for you. So we're industry experts in building high converting and low fraud verification experiences across industries. And one of the key parts in achieving this is leading with low friction, as Anthony was showing you. And Plaid IDV can help you with this. So Plaid IDV is really, really fast, measured in seconds, and it's only getting faster with some exciting stuff coming out later this year to drive that down even more. We support 16,000 ID document types globally. And for reference, most providers and competitors support maybe 2,000 to 5,000 ID documents. And what this means is you can support the long tail of document types, which reduces support queues, and you can more effectively bring your business to more users. We also support verification in 200 plus countries and territories, which is a mix of the anti-fraud checks, ID document checks, and authoritative data sources. So one of the big deficiencies that we've noticed in the ID verification world was that startups have vastly different ways they have vastly different verification setups than at-scale companies. So that's actually why we built Plaid IDV with this in mind. It can start as a turnkey system for smaller companies, letting them use our battle-tested UIs and instant integration methods. And then as you mature and your internal infrastructure becomes more sophisticated, you can graduate to what we call our hybrid verification system that's more driven via API and allows you to move to using your own UIs, but powered by the same great tech behind, like under the hood. You can also mix and match what you want to control more of in-house versus us handling it for you. All along the way, we'll maintain the audit trails, provide the same beautiful back-end review interfaces, and allow you to configure your risk and compliance settings using our dashboard. It's one system that progressively gets more sophisticated in line with your organization as you grow. So another benefit of working with Plaid is that you get a comprehensive picture of your customer. In order to holistically know your customer and effectively mitigate fraud, there are two key components. One is verifying your customer's identity, for instance, verifying that they are who they claim to be. And then two is ensuring that the verified customer is linking and leveraging financial accounts that actually belong to them. So you can do the first with Plaid identity verification, as Anthony showed you, and then the latter with our other product called Plaid Identity. So Plaid Identity verification, like Plaid Link, is that front-end interface that you can add to your onboarding flow. And then when a new customer begins onboarding, you can verify that they are who they claim to be by having them complete that verification flow. And this process takes less than 60 seconds on average. After you've successfully verified a new user's identity, you may want to confirm that the financial account that they're linking belongs to them. And to do that, you can hit the Plaid identity endpoint to receive account information on file with that financial institution. With identity, you receive information such as name, phone number, email address, and mailing address. And you can use this information to ensure that the account owner matches the identity that was already verified using IDV. So in addition to leveraging Plaid IDV with identity, sorry, I just need to get next slide here, there we go. So in addition to leveraging Plaid IDV with identity, lastly, by partnering with Plaid for your full stack onboarding experience, you get visibility into the customer sign-up process. A common issue that businesses face is it's usually pretty easy to determine who's actually a good user, and conversely, it can be easy to determine who's clearly a bad actor. But in the middle is a big gray area, and this is where we see most of the problems. You see some risk signals, maybe the user is using a non-corporate VPN, or they don't have an online presence. Maybe some of their identity attributes mismatch with what's on their credit header file. But it's not enough negative signals to outright block that user. and it's not all that confidence inspiring. So because Plaid has visibility into much more of the onboarding experience, we help you see when flags are raised across that user sign-up process. Say Plaid ID verification indicates a medium risk during verification. You can let that user through the process and then use our transaction risk product, Signal, to analyze them during the account funding process. So if the user then subsequently has a medium risk during account funding, that's a good way to resolve a gray area user risk problem and is a really unique way to resolve ambiguity. Plus, Signal gives you the attributes to help you fine-tune your risk model to continually better understand, detect, and minimize fraud. Ultimately, this means less manual review gating your users for a better user experience so that you can bring more users from app download to becoming a loyal customer very quickly. So with that, that concludes the presentation portion of today's webinar. So we're going to move things over to the Q&A section. I see questions are starting to come in here. So let's see here. All right. Okay, we've got some queued up. So let me go ahead and start reading some of them out. The first one is for me. It says, what makes up a good user? So that's a good question. And every organization is going to have a slightly different definition of a good user. But in general, the idea behind it is a user who is using your product for its intended purpose. So they're not trying to get around your systems. They're not trying to do something that you didn't intend with the ultimate intent of defrauding you. So that's the way that we tend to think about a good user. And then we have another related one that says, you mentioned the managed and hybrid experiences. Can you speak more to when it's preferable to use one over the other? So that's a good question. And it's not actually clear cut that every organization will use one method versus the other. What we'll frequently see is the same organization will have a managed experience for one of their use cases and then the hybrid experience for another use case. So for instance, on the user sign-up flow, they might use the managed user, or sorry, the hybrid user experience so that they can control their UI a bit more. But then if they have an exception flow via their support teams, for instance, to fix an issue with the verification system that they experience because the user input information incorrectly, then they'll use the managed experience for that. So they can just send the user or email them a link that was created using the dashboard. So it really depends on your use cases and what you're looking for. And then let's see here. So Anthony, I see, you can take the next couple questions.
Sure.
I see one here is, oh yeah, you can read it out.
I got it. Yeah, so we have a question that asks, are you able to accept EIN or check any business docs in addition to personal ID and docs? We cannot at the moment. This is not going to be a KYB solution, but that is actually something we intend to get to in 2023. So stay tuned. This does tie into another question that I see, so I'll address that at the same time. Someone is asking, do you see this identity verification process also work for B2B? So while we don't have a KYB solution at the moment, this is something that is commonly used by businesses to verify the principals and beneficial owners of entities and businesses. So it is used in that form for that use case. Let's see, we have, are you able to check personal IDs internationally? Similarly, how about business docs? So business docs I've just addressed. In terms of personal IDs internationally, absolutely. We can verify ID documents in over 200 countries. So the list of ID documents we support is actually around 16,000, which is very high. If you're, as Alain mentioned, this is much higher than typically what you'll see out of most solutions. So yes, in most countries, we can verify documents. And then let's see, I'll take another question. How do you verify SSN? So to verify SSN, so that's going to be the same as the way we verify the other PII attributes, the personally identifiable information at the beginning of the demo that I showed. Think of it as something similar to the credit bureau check. We leverage regulated data sources, authoritative data sources to go ahead and see if the identity that is being entered actually does exist. And if it does, to what extent is the information entered true? So that's going to be things like credit bureau data, financial institutions, some government records, all things that are regulated and have stringent verification requirements to make sure that it's not something easily modifiable by the end user. So there's no social media scraping happening here, no web scraping or anything along those lines. And that's the way we verify SSN as well as everything else. So name, date of birth, address, and phone number. Okay. I think we have more questions that came in. Let's see, let me take a look. Okay, so maybe you want to take this one, Alan. If we're currently set up for Plaid identity OAuth, how long is the implementation for IDV?
Sure, I can grab that. It's very easy. If you're already using Plaid products in any way, then you're already probably integrated with the Plaid SDK. And if you're integrated with the Plaid SDK, then adding ID verification can be as easy as adding it to your product list and creating a new session that you're able to then use to verify the user. So you're already halfway there, more than halfway there if you've already integrated the Plaid SDK.
Okay, let me take one.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, and by the way, to add to this, anecdotally, I deal with a lot of implementations, and this is something that is very quick. So it is kind of dependent on your resources, but something that is done within a week is absolutely reasonable. A good average is probably a couple of weeks, but the whole point was, with this codeless management platform, to make it so that with a few lines of code, you integrate the UX on your platform, and then everything is managed from the dashboard. So there's not a heavy integration burden here. Okay, let's take the next question. Does Plaid automate the identity match between IDV and identity, or just return the data to manually compare? It's a very good question. That is actually something we're working on at the moment, so it will be available for you to use pretty soon. And let's see, I'm not sure if there are any more questions. Okay, so without having fake documents on hand, how do we test the document verification? We received obvious fake IDs using another provider that verified and passed that document. So we've done extensive testing on our end to make sure that we don't let fraudulent documents through. If you wanted to test this on your end, you would have to basically use some kind of non-legitimate document. This could be anything from a very good fake to something that is not even an ID document, and then you'll see that it's going to fail a lot of the checks that we're looking for, basically, and you'll get a failure. So that's probably the best way to test it. I don't know, Alan, if you have any other suggestions, but probably not.
Yeah, I think Anthony's suggestion is pretty good. Oh, can you hear me now?
Yep, we're good.
Yeah, I think Anthony's suggestion is pretty good. Honestly, it's not that hard to make some kind of baseline level fake ID that you're able to practice with. Just make a little fake one for your personal purposes, just to test it out and see how things work, and print it out on an inkjet. Not the most sophisticated thing, but that will at least trick some verification systems, so it's worth giving that a try.
Yeah, I was going to say that is that will pass some systems, so it is still a good way to test. If you want to do a very, very good fake, that's more difficult, obviously. Okay, let's see. I don't know if you got any more questions coming, Alan. Let's see. I think I see one here. For the manual review of the verification results of the individual, is the dashboard specialized for the operation end user without getting into the Plaid configuration portion of the dashboard? I'm not sure I understand the question correctly. Is this basically asking if there's access specifically for review and not for configuration? If that's the case, not at the moment. The dashboard is intended to be kind of a limited access platform for the very key members of your team. So your lead integrator, your lead compliance person, and maybe a few analysts, and typically the product manager. So generally, the people who enter the dashboard will want to manage both processes. But let me know if I misunderstood your question, and I can come back to this. Okay. I think we have more questions coming in. Oh, so we have another question related to implementation. We just addressed that. If you have just joined, typically the implementation is anywhere from a week to 2 weeks. It is very dependent on your resources. We will move as quickly as you move. So if you want to go very quickly and go live in a few days, we can definitely accommodate that. Okay, we have another one come in. Love all the questions. I love the ability to change thresholds and splice checks, but how can I be confident an agent isn't deviating from the procedures I published? If you mean an agent as in a member of your own team, we would want to make sure we don't let anybody on the platform who may be at risk of having malicious actions. But again, if I'm not understanding the question correctly, let me know.
One thing I would add to that one is we do have built-in support for sort of like the best practices of having a 4eyes review system on, for instance, the Monitor product for the watch list screening. So if you want to, you can programmatically enforce that 2 different people on your team accept or reject the same hits to ensure that you don't have one person who's just making all of the decisions. So it starts with, you can have it start with a lower level agent that's then escalated to a compliance manager to actually complete that verification. And that's a great way for you to actually ensure that your procedures are being programmatically enforced.
Yeah, that's a great point. Okay. Do you use a database that is accessed for emails or phone numbers that are associated with fraudulent applications? We don't use a database of known fraudsters per se, if that's what you're asking about, because there are some considerations around that can lead to false positives when detecting fraud, but we do have a lot of checks that are centered around email. We'll even do things like, one check that we built is, we'll go ahead and check if your email has been found in any data breach historically. And the idea here is, if you have a legitimate email that you've been using for years, it will be in a data breach. That's basically the reality of email at this point. And if we can find it there, we can estimate the average age of your email or the minimum age of your email based on that. So if you've been in a breach 5 years ago, we know you've had that email for at least 5 years. That's great. That's a good indicator. If we don't see your email in any data breach, that's going to be something that appears suspicious, right? It could just be that you just created your account, but most of the time it means that you've probably tried to create a synthetic identity and you've created an email to associate it with it. And that kind of gives it away. So we definitely have a lot of checks around email and phone to make sure that there's no fraudulent activity or fraudulent flags being raised. Okay, let's take one more question, and I think we have to wrap up after. We're running out of time. Let's see. Is the ID data returned based on OCR of the front or by scanning the barcode? Is there a way to compare front and back? Yeah, we actually do both. So we'll OCR the front, and we'll also take a look at MRZ and barcode. So that is part of the checks that we run. And happy to give more details on any of these questions, by the way, if you want to reach out and get some more granular detail.
One thing I would quickly add to that, the tail end of that question is that another provider said that the barcode is often worn and not always readable. So that is somewhat accurate. The only thing that I would add to that is that the PDF 417 barcodes in particular can be quite, they can contain quite a bit of information in them, which means that they're a little bit harder to read relative to some other kinds of barcodes because the data is very, very dense. Which means that then, depending on the resolution of the camera of the end user who's capturing it, it may be easier or less easy for us to actually extract the information properly. Cool. So I think that's all the time we have for questions. They were great questions, actually. Pretty happy with them. Thank you for sending them in, and thank you for joining us. What's next? First, remember our 3 tips for minimizing fraud while maximizing customer acquisition. 1, don't take a one-size-fits-all approach. Build in dynamic experiences tailored to their risk, geography, and your internal compliance requirements. 2, automate and streamline that manual review process. And finally, 3, streamline your underlying IDV stack to reduce incompatibilities and overlap between systems. Next, if you're interested in trying out Plaid IDV or Monitor yourself, please get in touch. It's super easy to get started. And lastly, if you want to learn more, check out this Plaid Academy tutorial and reach out to our team. Thank you so much for joining. It's been a pleasure, and we hope that you have a wonderful day.
Thank you, everyone.